You're just going to have to deal with a green screen for me because Adam's laptop's not working for me either. So, small technical issue, and I hope you like green. My name's Christopher Skene. I work for PreviousNext. We're a national Drupal development shop. You can see our banner over there. But I'm here to talk to you today about aGov, which is distribution for the public sector in Australia. So this talk is called aGov, Past, Present and Future. Wow, look at those colours. That's awesome. Thankfully, most of my slides are white. And I'm going to talk a bit about why we built aGov, what the philosophy was behind it, where it is today, what we're going to do with it in the future. So this is a distribution we've designed. I want to move that. This is a distribution that we've designed. No, still not working. Guy up in the box is looking at me like, what is that doing? This is a distribution that we've designed primarily for government organisations. It does have some broader public sector use, but that's its main usage. So I guess that's why you're here. But first, a little bit of a journey into my past. We're going back in time. My Drupal journey started in 2007. Actually started a bit before that, but back in 2007, I was in film school and I was learning to be a filmmaker, and that was great, and I thought that was my future and that was going to be wonderful, until I realised that I had no money and I wasn't going to have any for the rest of my life. Somehow or other, with really no skills, no proper degree yet, just a bit of web development knowledge, I managed to land a job at a place called Land and Water Australia, small government agency. I can see Justin grinning over there, he knows all about it. And they had a website, or they had websites, multiple. And they needed someone who understood what the internet was to do something about it. So they had a problem. They'd purchased a proprietary piece of software and it didn't work. They had a lot of websites, 22 according to my slide, and they were updating them all the time. They had a different website. So they were always building new websites and trying to get their content across them. They had this standard problem whereby you've got a list of content over here that links to content over here, and when you add new content, you've got to go in and update your list manually and do all this stuff. Pain in the ass. So they had 40 staff, 10 were updating websites, and they were updating them all the time, even though that wasn't their job. So when they should have been what they were supposed to do, it was a job called knowledge and adoption. They were really just updating websites, which is probably an easy job for them, but not really suiting the organisation. So we had some requirements about what to do about this. How are we going to fix this problem? Well, we've got no money. We need to be able to edit content quickly. We want to build multiple sites, but we don't want to have to constantly be republishing content across these sites all the time. We don't want to have any redundant systems. We want it to work in all browsers, not just Internet Explorer or everything but Internet Explorer. The Land and Water Australia website had this great thing that when you landed on its homepage, it played a little sound of magpies. Unless you're an Internet Explorer, in which case it threw up a giant error. Every time. So it had to work everywhere. I had to be able to do it. Me, the developer, had to be able to do this because there was no money left to do anything else. We'd already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the other thing. So this, as it turns out, is a fairly common pattern. Developers being asked to do more with less, to be able to deliver websites that meet a bunch of basic government requirements without having to do too much. So we went through a shortlisting process. I'm not going to go into it too far, but we ended up on open source technology because we couldn't afford to buy anything. And we knocked them all out for one reason or another. We did build a MediaWiki site, but it didn't really suit our requirements especially. So it was the only one that didn't suck in any major way, basically. And bear in mind, we're talking about Drupal 5 here, so it did suck in a lot of ways, but just not as much as the others. So in 2008, Land and Water was the first Commonwealth agency to standardise on Drupal, which I'm quite proud of. We launched a good number of sites, and they all shared content between them really nicely, and they did all the things they had to do. Shortly after that, in 2009, the government closed us, which was a bit of a pain. But one of the advantages of we were actually able to hand this over to other agencies. So on this website, still online today, lwa.gov.au. Running, still maintained, and 20 years of research is on there. That was one of the massive benefits of doing that work. If we hadn't done that, the entire thing would have just evaporated. So let's come back now. Back in time. Should go the other way, shouldn't it? It doesn't. 2012. I've gone through a few other positions, and I've just joined PreviousNext. Now, about this time, there's a number of different ways you can build a website, right? We're at the point here where you can choose any one of these technologies on the proprietary side, and you can choose any of the ones on the open source side. They're all, pretty viable products really at this point, depending on how many hundred monies you have to throw at them. But there's been this development, sort of a rise of this thing called the Drupal distribution globally. And the one that most people have heard of by this point is Open Public, the big American distribution, which is available now. And at least one big government site is built on Open Public, Navy. So it has been used in Australia. But there's also the Canadian distribution, Wetbow, WetKit, whatever you call it. And there's other stuff going on. This idea that we can share and collaborate on Drupal projects globally. So, PreviousNext, one of the reasons I actually go and work for them is that they've got this vision, this thing called aGov or aGov or something. We're not quite sure. It had a lot of names. And when I joined them, this was an internal that had stretched back to at least the start of 2011, according to the emails that I've read anyway. And this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to get websites up quickly, stand up websites fast. They wanted to help people evaluate Drupal. So not just build a website, but actually see what it does and that it can do something that is what you want. And if you work on a larger project, you can use this as a standard starting point and get some benefit from it. So this is the vision that they had, and I was like, awesome, that sounds really cool. I'll be on board with that. What are our key requirements then? We've got this product. What are we looking for it to do? There's a whole lot of different ways in which we looked at this problem internally, but fundamentally it boils down to four things. It has to be accessible. It has to be WCAG, AA accessible, at least on the front, not so much on the back, because that's not technically possible with Drupal 7 yet. But on the front, this is what it's got to do. It's got to be secure, or at least it has to provide you with all the opportunities that you need to meet government security requirements. So it's got to have something in there, a solution for all of that kind of stuff. Is that flashing bothering you? It's bothering me. Keep thinking my slides are gone. It has to work everywhere. Now what this means is that if you plug this in on a server, firstly. But secondly, it works in all the browsers, except for the ones that nobody supports anymore, like Internet Explorer 6. It has to work on mobile. It has to be responsive. You have to be able to turn it on and not have to do any theming to get a website that actually just works. Finally, it has to do this out of the box. When you install this thing and turn it on, you shouldn't have to do any configuration. This should be ready and running. So these are kind of the four key requirements that we have, the driving requirements. We actually detail these in much more granular fashion, but these are the underlying principles behind them. I'm using this, I've never used Reveal.js to do slides before, which is why you get this cool spinny, all this stuff. The problem is I never know what my next slide is, so if I look at it surprised. So aGov was released as a beta in December 2012. It took us another year and a half to do a full release. So we did release candidates for about 12 months while we tried to iron out any bugs. But basically, what was available in December 2012 was what you can download today, more or less. All right, so that's the background. Let's talk about aGov 1. This is the version that you go and get now. And as far as we at PreviousNext are concerned, this is kind of the past for us. This is the list of things that are in the aGov 1 issue. These are the things that this must do. All right. So I'm going to go through them one by one because these are the main features of the aGov product. Can you launch a new website in under 10 minutes? Yes, you can. You can install aGov, and in the amount of time it takes to do the installer, which is actually more like 12 minutes, I'm sorry, it'll be up and running, and you can put content in straight away. Does it meet any aGimo web requirements? Yes, it does. Tricky one to do because aGimo sort of says, oh, you must have mandatory things and you must have these other things you have to do. And some of them are about practices rather than things you can enforce in a system. But anywhere that there's an enforceable requirement there, it does it. WCAG 2.0 AA out of the box, yes, and audited by Vision Australia as well. So that's great. Did I hear jam somewhere? Rich editing and asset management, yes and yes, that's all in there. Customizable workflow, yep, easy done. Most of these are just standard Drupal components, but they're in there and they're configured and they're ready to go. Drag and drop layouts, yep. Panels. Customizable branding. Now, I've ticked this one. You can go away and retheme it. You can reskin it. You can use our starter kit. Or you can just pick a color scheme and drop a logo in. So can you make it look exactly like the website you've always dreamed of? Probably not. Can you make it look acceptable? Yes, you can. Is it responsive? Yes, they're all responsive. And finally, we didn't want to lock anyone into using PreviousSnext for this product. We thought it should be an open source product. So can you use it in-house? Can you have choice of vendor? Yep, that's all there. Awesome. So that's great. Success. aGov 1. I think by our standards, aGov 1 is a success. A lot of people have used it. A lot of people have installed it. We're building up a community around it, and we're really happy with how that's gone. That said, aGov 1 is nowhere near the perfect product, and it's nowhere near the product that I think we envisage that it can be. So some of the things that have come back to us, some of this is internal feedback from our own developers, and some of this is from people who've used it. The first one is the design is not modern enough. So we sort of agree. It was based on the Prime Minister's website, and that's a conservative website to start with, which is a few years older than what we did. There are new design trends coming through, which we'd like to perhaps integrate where we can. We're not focusing too much on this at the moment, but there's opportunities there. Features are hard to work with. So if you've ever installed and used the features module, you'll know that if someone gives you a feature and you try and override it, it's like pulling teeth. It's awful. There's a big debate internally about how we're going to solve this problem, but we agree that it's not optimal. The content types are too tightly defined. This is partly an issue with what content types we give you and partly how we've defined them. So that's another good piece of feedback. It's hard to extend. I'll talk more about complexity in a distribution in a moment. I'll come back to that. It's very hard to theme. Yes, we agree. And we fixed that already. I'll come back to that later. It doesn't capture the right configuration. So one of the things here is it doesn't have quite enough security configuration in it, and maybe some other things that shouldn't be configured are. So that's not something we knew when we built it 2 years ago, but it's something that we're more aware of now. And finally, it's still missing some key features. All right, so aGov 1, not perfect. So let's talk about now. This is what we're doing in aGov now, the development we're doing now. First of all, 1.x. Last week we released aGov 1.5. We've been doing a point release every week at the moment because we're really heavily in development and we're trying to stay on top of it. However, we don't really expect that the one branch is going to get any further features, with one exception. At the moment this is stable and we're keeping it that way. What we are doing, however, is we're integrating some old work we did on state themes. Now this is a really pretty slide that right now looks terrible. We're introducing state themes for New South Wales, Queensland, ACT, WA, Northern Territory, They're basically a customised version that you can turn on that meets the branding requirements of that state. So they're slightly different from the federal requirements. So we're putting those in. We've had them sitting there for quite a while, and it's just a question of cleaning them up and getting them in and ready.
Can you snap the lectern or use this mic?
Sorry, yeah, sure.
This one.
Is this not working?
No, it's on and off. If you can just
All right, I'll take it off. Comments from the floor. I'll take it out. Whoop, let's go back. All right, aGov 2. So this is the work we're doing currently. This is our current development work. And I want to talk for a moment about complexity in web projects, because this is one of the driving factors that we're wrestling with at the moment. This graph shows kind of what happens to the complexity of a project as you add new requirements, right? There's no rocket science here. As you add more components, overlapping components to a project, it gets more complex, sure. Distributions work a little bit differently. The aim with the distribution is to keep the complexity of the components low, so that as you go forward, when people are building on your product, they don't run into problems. If, for example, you add the complexity of these two projects together, the distribution plus your own project on top of it, the project complexity is actually much higher. So what we want to do when we're building a distribution is make it in such a way that you don't have to deal with the distribution's complexity. Now, one of the problems with aGov 1 at the moment is it's overly complex in certain areas, and the practices that we've used to build certain things make it more complex for you to do your own things. So what we want to do really is get out of the way. That's our main job. We want to reduce the complexity such that when you start building, instead of following this blue line where the project gets more complex, you can use what's in the distribution to start with. You get all that stuff for free, and then you get a bit of complexity at the end. That's the idea. And I'll talk about complexity for a moment in terms of a specific example. How many ways can we place a piece of content in a layout? In aGov specifically at the moment, but generally in Drupal. So we can put a block in a Drupal region. We can put a bean in a Drupal region. We can put a pane in a panel region. We can put a block in a panel region. We can put a bean in a panel region. We can put a fieldable panel pane in a panel region. We can do a block in a field. We can do a field in a block. We can do an entity embedded in a field formatter. We can do an entity embedded via a token. We can do an entity embedded via a view. And we can do any of these with a different view mode. And I haven't done all of them yet. So even taking out the ones that we don't really use in aGov, they're there, but they're not really part of the setup. There's still quite a lot of ways in which you can place a piece of content. Too many, really. So it's about finding the sweet spot. This graph, in its lovely purple lines, which used to be black, show the level of configuration that you must do on a website versus the complexity of the project. So standard Drupal, when you install it, requires a lot of configuration. There's lots and lots of configuration to do. But it's not very complex, right? So any configuration that you do doesn't add a lot of complexity to it, up to a point. aGov 1 added a lot of configuration, but also added a bit of complexity, pushed it too far into the over-configured space, if you like. So what we're trying to do with aGov 2 really is pull that back down, reduce the complexity of aGov 2 such that it's not dissimilar from working with Drupal when you're building a site. I guess a good test should be if I install Drupal and I install aGov, it should be no harder for me to build a website on either of them. It's just that in aGov, most of it should be done and I should be able to do it straight away. So in moving aGov forward, we're talking about reducing complexity. We're talking about reducing forced configuration. This is before we get to new features. And we're talking about overcoming mental model inertia. Now what I mean here is when you go and do one thing, you go and put a block in a region, you've got a certain mental model of how you're going to do that. When it comes time to edit the home page, and you've got to do one part of it in the sidebar and one part of it in the panel. If you know what you're doing with Drupal, this is not hard, but if you're new to Drupal, it's very difficult to switch between these different ways of thinking. So we have to reduce the number of places that this happens as well. So this is what we're doing. These are the actual this is the development work that we're doing or looking at in 2.x at the moment. So let's start with simplifying theme development. The first thing we identified was that working with Omega 3, which is what we had in there, was too complex and too difficult, and overriding it was way too hard. So that has been ripped out completely and replaced with an identical theme running Zen 5, which is John Albin's work. So we've got John Albin with us now, and he's been working really hard on this and actually componentizing what we've done. So in some ways, aGov is almost John's. It's a place where John can come and do all the component stuff that he's talked about without any of the problems of having a client saying it must be done tomorrow. So that's great. So it should be really good when he's done that. So refactoring CSS around components, that's a really big part of it. This will make this particular theme easier to fork. If you want to come along and re-theme based on this theme, it's going to be much easier. It's a much more stable, or not stable, but it's a much simpler way of doing it. It should be easier to sub-theme as well, and we've already done this a few times. The old aGov-based theme was really hard to sub-theme. There were multiple CSS files you had to override, all sorts of crazy stuff. So now much simpler. And it should be easier to colour, and this comes out of the component design. Much easier for you to take your branding and overlay it over the top of this. The basic design at the moment will stay the same. We haven't looked at new designs, but we are looking at some different sort of implementations of the designs, and we would like to look at new designs in the future. All right, so that's the theme. If you go and download the alpha of aGov, 2.x alpha 1, which we uploaded this week, you'll get that this week, so you can actually go and try the new theme if you want. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. We're looking at simplifying the content types and views. I guess we've found that often we don't use them ourselves when we're building, and they're a little bit complex. So we're talking about ways in which we can do information architecture designed around content scalability. Now, that sounds kind of technical, but actually what it means is that everything's kind of the same. So that if you go and add a new content type, it just gets the right styles out of the box, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about view modes or any of those sorts of things. Another thing that we've been trialling internally is some ideas around building landing pages that scale really easily. So this is not something that we've committed to the project yet, but I've put it up here to show that we're thinking about different ways in which you can build landing pages and other things really simply. You can just go, oh, I just need a big list here, and I need a small list here, and a bit of text, and it's done. You don't have to worry too much about which content goes where, that kind of stuff. Bear in mind that we don't necessarily think that you will always build your sites this way, but that as a basic starting point, we want something that scales really nicely and works for the majority of cases. That's about kind of reducing complexity, getting out of the way. All right. We've talked about reducing the content types. So at the moment we've got 8. And 2.x, the current idea is that maybe it'll have about 6, a little bit different. So I'll just show you those. These are the current content types we have. We give you a standard page, blogs, media releases, news articles, publications, events, and this thing called a promotion, which is really just a way of featuring content in different places on your site. It's not really a type of content the same way as the others. In 2.x, we're talking about this model. So, slightly different. What have we done? First of all, we've taken the 3 article types and combined them together. The rationale behind this is that not every site is going to want blogs, media releases, or news articles. None of these types may be appropriate for what you want to do. You may want to mix some of them together. You may want media releases and news articles to be the same thing. You may want your news articles and your blogs to be the same thing. Giving you one article type to begin with is a much more flexible approach. If you need blogs, great, we can add them. Really easy. But starting with a smaller number makes it easier for us to build something that scales for you. There's some discussion around turning a publication, pulling it back to a document. This is really just a nomenclature issue. Publications and documents are not always the same thing, but often a publication is a kind of document. I know a big government website in town that only has 2 content types. They have pages and documents, and that's it. And that's how they do everything. And that works really well for them. So reducing complexity there is good. Finally, we're looking at adding ways that you can add links to your site and manage links, since that comes up all the time. So we'll probably add a link content type for you to manage those. Right, content editing improvements. Just check the time. Right, I'll try and wrap it up quick. We're using CK Editor now instead of TinyMCE. You can add internal and external links via Linkit, so there's a much easier way to create links around your site. It's really good. We're looking at ways to improve the admin experience overall, and also simplifying the views, so just cleaning some of that stuff up. We've always had this aim with aGov that it would meet the minimum information security manual guidelines. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're auditing aGov against those guidelines. We're working out where there's a guideline that you'll have to meet as an agency publishing a website, and how does aGov meet that. A lot of that stuff's in there already, but it's not quite configured correctly. So one of the first things we did a few months ago was we added 2014 Information Security Manual compatible password policies to aGov. So more security controls out of the box there. And we're also looking at ways to actually audit aGov for security before we send it to you. So we've got a project internally to use Skipfish to test things, do intrusion testing and security testing on websites. So we're looking at ways in which we can do that in our builds as well. Finally, a few functional improvements. File locking is coming. File locking is a way of preventing files from being deleted. Speed up the installer, and hopefully fix AGLS metadata, though that's been coming for about a year and a half. So we'll see. We're currently blocked by the module that provides the source of that data. All right, so that's the past. Whoop, gone the wrong way. So in order that Craig has time to speak, I'll just take a few more minutes of your time. Let's talk about the future. What happens with aGov 3? We're planning to release aGov 2 sometime in the next 6 months. That's sort of the window that we're looking at. Depends on what kind of feedback we get and how long it takes to go through the process. But we want to get aGov 2 down, and then we're going to look at some bigger improvements in aGov 3. So here are some of the things that we've got on the cards, and maybe I'll just, instead of going through all the slides, I'll just talk about them a bit. So the first one is revisionable layouts. One of the main issues with Drupal at the moment is it's really hard to workflow pages with layout. You can kind of revision them to a certain extent, but it's very hard to workflow them. There are incompatibilities between modules. There's different ways to solve this problem, pardon me. But one of the biggest ones is as soon as you pull in any external component into your page, maybe you've got a view or a block, you can change your page, but the block the revisions of the blocks or the other components are not necessarily tied to it. So even when you've got revisionable, workflowable pages, keeping them in sync is all very difficult. So we haven't worked out how to solve this yet, but we've been trying a lot of things. Another one is something that I've called site kits. But what this really is about being able to build different kinds of websites with aGov and having that option in front of you when you install it. We looked at doing this with apps, a system called apps, but that may not be feasible for our model. So we're looking at other ways in which we can provide different kinds of sites. You want a blog site? No worries. We'll install and enable all the stuff you need for that. You want a larger site that's got a media portal? Great, we'll stand that up for you. So thinking about ways in which we can provide that functionality across different kinds of templates is important. We're talking about some new kinds of content types, specifically aligning aGov, I guess, with some other practices globally. So providing information about government services and providing information about people is two things that Open Public allows you to do that aGov doesn't currently have an out-of-the-box solution for. So we're looking at that. we're talking about getting rid of features, goodbye features. So one of the issues with features is when you install aGov, great, features comes in, bang, 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 everything gets built. But what happens when you want to override that? If you know how to use features, first of all, it's a pain because you've got to override aGov supplied features, which makes it hard to update. If you don't know how features work, it's even worse. Because then you've got to go and build stuff and maybe you revert a feature somewhere and things get deleted. So we're thinking about ways in which we can get rid of features entirely, make that much smoother. The two next to that, goodbye features, one, consuming data and schema.org are kind of related. So those are looking at ways in which you can publish and consume linked data, open data, and other things like that. We've been doing a bit of work on this internally anyway, so it makes sense to push some of it into aGov where it's relevant. Now, for example, in terms of publishing, that may simply be that when you put a new content type in aGov, it's got some schema.org stuff configured already. Schema.org is consumed by all the major search engines, used by about 15% of the internet. It's a big SEO win for you if you can publish it. Consuming data is very similar. Can we provide a really simple way that you can go, Department of X has this interesting page about something or other. I'd like to reference that here. So I'm going to point a field at it and it's going to pull in some schema.org data and republish it on my website. Something really simple like that. I think there'd be really interesting opportunities there in terms of being able to pull data off data.gov.au as well, or using one of the government RDF namespaces. I note that Australian government's been particularly woeful in publishing RDF data. Out of thousands of data sets on data.gov.au, I think there's 2 that have RDF data. But we can change that. We can actually make linked data work if a product like aGov has it. The last 3, new designs, we don't have them at the moment. We're aware that new designs in aGov would be really useful for a lot of people. So we're looking for opportunities where we can get that done. We're doing some work on security, and wherever we can improve security and maintain security in aGov, that's really important. And we're also working on new accessibility tools. So aGov already has an accessibility checker where you can post a page off to one of our web services and have it checked, and a scheduler where you can schedule your entire website to be scanned. But we want to do better than that. So at the moment we're looking at introducing on-the-fly accessibility checking of your content, a little bit like what was talked about in one of the accessibility sessions this morning. So that's currently in testing. All right. Last of all, we want to produce a product that's relevant to people who actually use it. It's open source, we welcome contributions, and we welcome feedback. So how can you get involved in aGov? So first of all, we should announce that we've got a mailing list, basically, at this point. If you go to agov.com.au/community, you can get on our mailing list for aGov, and that will help us keep you up to date about any news from aGov, updates, but also, more importantly, if we're running consultations or other programs where we want government input into what we're doing, that's really a great way for you to let us know that you want to be part of that. So let us know what your aGov idea is. Those are the 3 websites you'll need, agov.com.au and PreviousNext.com.au. If you're interested in getting in touch with me about any of this, you can do so through PreviousNext or my website, extifer.com. And that's it. Thank you very much.